Hey guys, I'm Clarke, and today I'm having a look at some tips and tricks to improve your slide playing. Now this video is actually a request from one of my members, Jimmy. Thank you very much for the request. I hope I do this video justice. If you want to join my community of guitar nerds, then have a look at the join button below and see if memberships are for you. Okay, so I'm actually going to take Jimmy's question one step further and include a bit in this video for beginners, people who perhaps are used to playing guitar without a slide, but have never done it with a slide or are struggling to get into it. So if you're not a beginner, skip to the timestamp on screen now. Okay, so the first thing you need to decide if you're going to get into slide, that kind of rhymed, is which finger you're going to have the slide on. Now, there is no right or wrong, but there are advantages and disadvantages to each. So the most common you'll probably see is on the third finger. This allows you to mute strings with the fingers on this side and on this side, gives you a lot more control. However, it does mean that if you want to have some chords you're playing, it does make that a bit more difficult because one of your fingers is massively restricted. An alternative is to put it on your little finger. This leaves these three fingers kind of open to do chord and just other normal style playing. I'm not sure what to call non-slide playing. Non-slide playing. And then you can add in the slide when you want to. So I've seen people advise that you pick one and just stick with it. I actually kind of disagree with that. I will play on my third finger if I'm doing a song which is predominantly slide because it's a stronger finger and I feel I can dig in more for that rockier stuff. But if I'm doing something that has little bits of slide, but little bits of chord work, I'll put it on my little finger. And in fact, I'll use a smaller slide for that so that I can play normally and just add in those little bits of slide when I want to. Like I say, there isn't actually a right or wrong. That's just kind of my experience with it, but mess around with both. I actually suggest getting a slide that fits this finger and this finger and seeing which one feels more right to you, because that's probably the place to start. You can use your first or second finger. There's nothing actually saying you can't. Second finger, you'll probably get away with. The issue with the first finger is muting. What we'll come on to shortly is that you'll need to mute behind the slides to stop getting weird sympathetic ring noises. So I would suggest not your first finger, but there's no actual reason you can't with your second. I just personally find it less comfortable. I think most players do. If you're not sure which slide to go for, then I have actually done a Slide 101 video where I talk about the different types of slides and their advantages and disadvantages. There'll be a link floating around here somewhere, as well as down in the description. Okay, so the next thing you need to decide is which tuning you're using. Now, I have tried multiple, and what I'm going to tell you now is kind of my experience of what I think is the most intuitive. So one school of thought is that you play in standard tuning, which is what I've got here. It means that you know where all the notes are already if you're used to playing guitar the non-slide way. So you know where the notes are. The disadvantage is that you can't just bar across one string and get a chord, but you can bar across three strings. So if you use the D, G, and B strings, you'll get a chord. So you can't just kind of go hit all six strings like you can in an open tuning, but you can get that slide flavor. So I think this is particularly good if you're doing the approach of mostly playing without the slide, but want to put a little bit in there sometimes. It means you can literally do a C chord on the 5th fret, D chord on the 7th fret, and so on. And of course, because it's standard tuning, you already know where the notes are if you're used to playing guitar without a slide, so you can still do your pentatonics and your other scale shapes. Incidentally, drop D also works quite well, I find. Yes, I could have cut that bit out, but we all know the real definition of drop D is that noise. So drop D obviously allows the lowest three strings to be bars and you get a power chord. So of course you can do exactly the same with the slide. Okay, so an alternative way of approaching slide playing, and potentially the more expected one, is open tunings. Now, the two most common I think people use are open E and open G. Now, I've tried both, and I think I probably prefer the sound of open G, but I do think it's considerably less intuitive to use if you're not used to that tuning. Now, the reason for that is predominantly that because the low string is a D, but if you play the open chord, it's not a D, it's a G. I find it a lot more confusing as to where the chords are. So if you're just getting into slide, I suggest open E, simply because the low string is still an E, which means if you were going to play this A major chord, you can now play it in the same place, same fret, just by barring across it. And to me, that makes it a lot easier to get into. It also means that the top two strings remain unchanged. Still B and E, which means any scale shapes you know on those two strings will still be true. Now, once you've picked the tuning and the finger you're going to put your slide on, you're ready to go, I suggest picking a melody that you know and just trying to emulate it with the slide, because it takes some getting used to just figuring out how to get the notes in tune. You'll immediately notice that when you're playing without a slide, you play between the frets. If you do that with a slide, it ends up flat. So you've got to do it over the fret. A couple of helpful tips when you're starting out. I suggest having a guitar that's set up for slide. By that, I mean having thicker strings so they don't bend out of tune as easily, and also having the action higher up. That means moving the strings further away from the fretboard. The reason is, when you're playing with a slide, you never want the strings to come in contact with the fret. Your slide essentially behaves as a moving fret. So the closer the strings are to the fretboard, the harder it is, because any small amount of pressure will make it hit the frets. If they're further away, you can get away with more pressure, and it just makes it a bit easier to learn. Now, the tips that I think will be beneficial whether you're a beginner or an intermediate slide player. The first one, as I alluded to earlier on, is left-hand muting. Now, this will be most noticeable on acoustic instruments, but you can have it come through on electric as well, and the problem is sympathetic ring. Now, for example, if I pick the 9th fret, that's what should be ringing through, but of course the strings behind, there's nothing stopping them ringing. Doesn't sound great, so you don't really want both those ringing together. It muddies the chord and makes it sound less pleasant. So the way we can stop that is using whatever fingers we have available behind the slide to gently rest on the strings behind it. Now, if I try to do the same thing behind the slide with these fingers not there, versus with them there, makes a huge difference to deaden that noise and make the notes that you are trying to play come through much cleaner. Now, this does take a bit of practice. It's easy to accidentally fret there, in which case you create the same problem. Or not press hard enough, in which case you still get the sympathetic ring. It's just a feel thing. You'll get used to just having those fingers in a particular position next to the slide to just help you mute whenever you're playing. Some players want to get that sympathetic ring, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want that kind of dirtier blues sound, you might find that it's actually quite useful and quite nice to have that ringing. So you'll see people sort of doing this when they're playing, getting their fingers well out the way to get some of that sympathetic ring, but I suggest learning how to control it. Before I get on with the next part of the video, I just wanted to say that if you're enjoying the video, then please do consider subscribing. It's a brilliant way of supporting the channel, and of course, it's completely free. If you want to support the channel even more, then you could have a look at the merch link down below, or you could consider becoming a member. It's less than £5 a month, and you get early access to videos, access to a private chat room with myself and the other members where we discuss all guitar nerdery stuff, as well as updates as to new gear I'm getting, new techniques I'm working on the guitar, and just general stuff about my life as a musician. So if any of that stuff sounds interesting, check out the links below. Okay, the next thing that I would just like to impart knowledge of is how to play the pentatonic scale in open E tuning. Now, I don't tend to mess with the entire pentatonic. I've got some sort of set shapes that I find work really, really well, and I'm going to show those to you now. Now, to make this easy, I'm going to refer to the strings as if I was still in standard tuning, because I think that's how most of us think, even when we're not. So the normal pentatonic scale that I use starts on the 12th fret on the E string, 10th fret E string, same on the B string, and then you can get that same note there on the G string, G sharp string, 13th fret, and then you go to the 11th fret on the same string, and then you can resolve to the 12th fret D string, which is actually now an E. You can then also add in the 17th and 15th fret on the E and B string, same as if you were in standard. Resolving to the E on the 17th on the B. Always useful knowing where your roots are. Now that also translates down to the lower octave on the 5th and 3rd frets. A good way of thinking of it is that the 3rd and 5th fret work on all strings except the G sharp string, which only the 3rd really works. Okay, next tip, vibrato is your friend. Now it is incredibly hard sometimes to get slides perfectly in tune because you can't rely on frets anymore, you're relying on just your ear. Often in gigs, it's actually quite difficult to hear, so vibrato can really be your friend. You can get away with some pretty wide vibrato in most styles of music with a slide, and it just helps that to feel like you're anchored in the right pitch. Okay, the final tip I want to show you is playing behind the slide. Now, this is something that I got from Joey Landreth, who, if you haven't heard him play, is a master of slide playing. So look up his solo stuff, Joey Landreth, and his band Brothers Landreth. Essentially, what we're doing here is playing one note with the slide and then using a different finger to play a note behind the slide. Because you're pushing it down, you're pulling it away from the slide and allowing it to ring out. So, for example, I'm going to slide up to the 5th fret A string, B string, and then fret the 3rd fret D string, E string, with my first finger. But you can do them at the same time. It means you can come up with some really nice phrases without having to move the slide really fast. And you just end up with a much more fluid sound. So you can experiment with that to get some cool passages without having to race the slide all over the fretboard. So there you have it, some tips and tricks as to how, as a non-slide player, you can get used to playing with a slide. Like I said, I'm no Derek Trucks, but I think actually that's what makes this perfect, is that if you're someone like me that predominantly plays with that slide, these are the ways I found useful to get into playing with one. Thanks again to Jimmy for the question. If you are interested in joining memberships and joining the conversation in our private Discord chat, hit the join button below. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon to be notified of new videos. Have yourself a great day, and I'll see you next time.